I thought you were going to wear your maize and blue shirt.
Hello, ClimateCAP. So, let's go. Thank you for the excitement, and thank you for being here. This panel is on onshoring clean energy supply chains, and I'm very happy that a lot of people are excited about that topic. And with that, we have a great list of guests, and would love to hear all of their opinions. And with this, I'll transfer the mic to Professor Ravi from University of Michigan. Just FYI, we have the Hoover app running. If you have any questions, put your questions in there. We'll have 12 to 15 minutes towards the end. The most upvoted questions will be the ones that will be asked from the panel, so keep upvoting as well. And with that, Professor.
Yeah, guys, can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Good morning, right? Yeah, good morning. I think after this is lunch, right? So with the proteins, you should get some good minerals into your diet. So that's what this food for thought is about. I am Ravi Anupindi. I'm in the technology and operations group. My research teaching interests are in global supply chain, but I've been pulled into some discussions about the role of critical minerals and national security and groups at Washington, D.C. So I'm really excited about this panel, but this is not about me. It's about our distinguished panelists here. I'll have them introduce themselves and give some opening remarks. So you can see all the people here, so maybe start with you, Kevin. Yeah.
Sure, welcome. I'm Kevin Self. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy, Business Development, Government Affairs for Schneider Electric, a 188-year-old company based in France, but with deep roots here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. In 1991, we bought a company called Square D. Square D was founded here in Ann Arbor by a 1895 Michigan graduate who invented the safety switch. Started a company called Detroit Fusion Manufacturing. People would come in, point up to the wall, say, just give me the Square D. And so the name was changed. So Schneider bought Square D in 1991, and now our electrical panels are in 40% of the homes in this country. We're in over 1 million buildings on the planet. You can't be on these devices more than 4 hours without going through a data center that we power. So as the world becomes more energized, electrified, decarbonized, Schneider is behind the walls, ensuring that that occurs. And just one interesting data point, I quote Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So along with Adam Simon up here 6 years ago this April, we hosted an event on campus of the University of Michigan called Towards Carbon Neutrality. Because at the point, the university had a very poor record of moving forward, and we thought that it needed some heavy elbows to push it to do more. That then launched the Presidential Commission on Carbon Neutrality in October of 2018, which was formed in 2019. From that, we've also formed an organization called Voices for Carbon Neutrality, voicesforcarbonneutrality.org, and we continue to advise President Ono, Vice President Chattis, and the university on the path forward. It all started with 3 people, Adam, myself, and Susan Fancy, who said, we're not doing enough, we need to move faster.
Yeah, Brian.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Brian Hartmann. I'm president of North Star Clean Energy. North Star is a wholly owned subsidiary of CMS Energy. I've been in this role for about 3 years now, and I spent almost 3 years leading CMS's corporate strategy before that. North Star is a developer, EPC manager, owner, operator, financer of power generating assets across the country. We have 12 operating assets right now across gas, biomass, solar, wind, and storage. And we have 6 more solar developments in various stages right now, many of which are actually here in Michigan. Really excited to talk more about just what it takes to be a developer in the changing landscape we have right now.
So my name is Adam Simon. I'm a professor here in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Michigan. And my research focuses on the geology and chemistry of metal ore deposits. I work with mining companies around the world, currently on all 6 continents except for Antarctica, to help mining companies understand how specific types of metal deposits form, copper, gold, rare earth metals, platinum groups, and then develop genetic models that allow mining companies to predict where they can locate new resources. So a lot of my effort now is also trying to develop new models that allow us to discover new ore deposits, which are critically in demand.
Thank you, panelists. I mean, just picking up on, I didn't know that there was mining at the campus of University of Michigan, mining faculty. So I have to credit Alex and Arpit to really literally dig him out of wherever he's hiding and bring him to this forum. And he's being very modest. He's also the Arthur Tarnow Professor, which is university gives out 5 of these professorships for their excellence in undergraduate teaching. I really urge him to go to his website and see what he's doing for, not only he's talked about research, but for really exciting people about what's under the earth and becoming passionate about those things. So I think really looking forward to the discussion. So the broader theme for this particular session is around critical minerals and the role of critical minerals in not only the energy transition that we are seeing from renewable energy, but also batteries, electric vehicles, and all that stuff. So that's kind of the broad theme. We want to look at both the supply side and the demand side of the equation. I'm sure you're familiar with all of the incentive schemes that are coming out from the government under IRA, other bills that are coming in. So, and put this under the broader context of the geopolitical situation and lots of discussion on onshoring supply chains, because if you look at the Biden IRA Act, the incentives are structured based on how much of domestic supply chains, supplies are coming from the domestic industry. So with that, the first question I would like to ask is, what does onshoring of clean energy supply chains actually mean, and what does it mean to your work in some ways?
Sure. So as I said, Schneider Electric, global company, about 40 billion in global revenue, about 10 billion in North America, US, Canada, Mexico. Actually, last year, for the first time ever, for the first time in 188 years, North America is now our largest region and our fastest growing. A lot of it driven by the benefiting from President Biden's various policies. Pre-COVID, most supply chains had really worked over the previous decades to optimize on cost. And I'm sure we talked about, could there be a pandemic someday? How would you deal with it? But it's never going to happen. Keep kicking the can down the road. COVID hit, and we then saw the issues that a lot of us were dealing with is we need to move things closer to where we generate the sales. And also in the last couple of years, or actually currently, there's issues with the Suez Canal, with the warring factions over in the Middle East, and climate affecting the Panama Canal, greatly reducing shipping through there. And so a lot of reasons why we need to be moving more manufacturing into the US. We at Schneider are absolutely in the process of doing this. We've announced about $300 million of incremental manufacturing. And one of the reasons as well is to take advantage of the stimulus money, either selling into the federal government or taking advantage of the Build America, Buy America Act. You need to have US content. Now, of course, the US government is very gray in terms of how they define it, and they won't define it. And so you're having to make assumptions with this big solution that you're providing as to what it's going to mean. So we are actively involved in talking to the administration that it's going to be pretty difficult to both achieve your aspirations at the speed you want and have all of it US made. And so it's an ongoing debate and discussions. I was in Washington last week actually with talking with John Podesta in the White House, continuing on behalf of the whole electrical manufacturers that to get speed, you're not also going to be able to deliver on the all US content, but across the industry, absolutely happening quickly.
So I think that's an important point he's making. I think it can be captured, this tension between, doing it fast and doing it the right way, and we'll come to some of those discussions. But Brian, you come from the demand side of the equation. Could you say, talk about this onshoring clean energy supply chain? What does it mean for you in your business?
Yeah. There's a lot that's kind of baked in there, right? And so we at Northstar, we think about everything kind of from the customer lens first. So, right, so what's the customer's perception of onshoring going to actually be? And is that going to be reality or is it not, right? And so what we have seen is, a real uptake in our customers asking us how much of your project is really being manufactured in the US, right? Like where the module's coming from, where's the racking coming from, where's the steel coming from? And there is a lag, right? It takes a long time to actually build all of this into the US right now. So one of the main things that we're trying to do right now is work with our customers, help educate them on like, what does it really take to bring all of this onshore, and what is the timing when we're going to be able to have more and more of our component pieces being onshore. One of the interesting kind of byproducts of all of this, and I guess it's probably an intentional byproduct, is there's a lot of construction manufacturing right now that's happening in the US. And so if you think of like every single component piece here that needs a factory to make it actually happen, there isn't enough skilled construction labor to actually just bring the factories online as quickly as you might think or you might hope. So we're actually seeing you don't think of construction necessarily when you talk about onshoring solar module production, but the construction labor ends up being a big determining factor of how fast everything really moves.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Adam, you work across 5 continents, right? 5 or 6? 5, right? So you look at, we can't change where the ore is.
Correct.
It is where it is, right? So what does it mean to say onshore clean energy supply chains? What implication does it have?
So when I think about onshoring critical mineral resources, I spend a lot of time talking to groups around the United States who are very supportive of the energy transition and very supportive of all of the climate goals built into the energy transition, into the Inflation Reduction Act, but simultaneously oppose extracting, exploiting, mining the resources necessary to build out this infrastructure. So I'm focused on helping society really understand that it is environmentally safer to mine in the United States than it is to mine in countries that do not have an EPA, a Clean Air Act, a Clean Water Act. In the United States, mining can be done without corruption. Mining can be done under the oversight of both federal and state agencies. And in the United States, mine operations are also always overseen by third-party, non-affiliated companies who certify all of the mining operations. The big challenge is that that's a hard sell. The collective we got really good in the 1900s of offshoring our mining. If you go back and you look at European colonization of the United States, and you can picture Europeans moving from the Atlantic west and then going to California, the gold rush in the late 1840s, and moving from the Pacific Ocean east, we got really good at first artisanal mining because almost all of the European immigrants were artisanal miners. And then we got good at industrial mining. And then post-World War II, we got really good at mining in other countries. And in some countries, that has actually gone really well. For example, in Chile, if you look at copper production in Chile from 1960 to 2020, Chile is the world's biggest producer of copper. Simultaneously, as copper production increased, the Human Development Index for Chile increased significantly. Life expectancy increased. Number of years of schooling increased. Gender equality increased. And so we have really good examples of the benefits of mining, but in the United States, we have a lot of people and a lot of environmental groups who put up a wall to mining it here, when the reality is mining it here is the safest way to mine it. It also creates jobs. We have the same challenge in the mining industry that there aren't enough qualified workers. If you go back to World War II, every Ivy and Ivy League plus school had somebody like me as a full professor. And most Ivy League schools had 2 of me as a full professor. Now they have 0. So sort of as the climate change movement really started to grow in the 90s, we systematically decreased the number of students graduating from geology programs, and now the mining industry is really finding it challenging to hire labor.
This is excellent. Because you're raising, I've heard similar things as well in conversations in DC, whether it doesn't matter which government department you look at, DOD, DOC, DOS, everybody. But what you raised, Adam, is about this sustainability embedded within mining, and I would expand that to both the environmental side and the labor side of the equation, and this pushback. So this community who's pushing back still want their iPhones, still wants to drive Teslas, but don't want to have their mines and want to have their golf courses, right? So that pivots to in terms of policies, what can be done or what should be done by the government to to encourage mining. And I would like to also add to that discussion that it's not enough just to mine the ore. There is, if you look at the entire value chain, it is, you have to get the ore off the ground, but you also have to process the mineral. So if you begin to look at geopolitically where the controls are and what's happening, so I think maybe start with you, Anu, to speak to what, from a policy perspective, needs to happen. What are the conversations that are happening, and maybe get to, the other two colleagues as well. Yeah.
So I think where we need to start is the mining law that regulates mining in the United States was passed by Congress in 1872. It's 152 years old, and it needs to be updated. It's generally pretty good, but the mining law of 1872 was really written to allow artisanal miners to stake claims for specific areas of the earth within the United States under which they wanted to mine. And it eliminated the ability for people to then squat on that land if somebody had a claim through the mining law of 1872. The biggest challenge to mining now in the United States is getting the permits to construct a mine. And there are some examples you can look at. One is a deposit, a copper deposit in Arizona called Resolution. And in 2014, Barack Obama, he approved a land swap that would allow Rio Tinto, a large mining company, to start underground mining at Resolution. That deposit alone, if it goes into production, would produce about 500,000 tons of copper every single year, which is a lot of Teslas and a lot of Lightnings and a lot of Ford Mustangs electric. They still haven't started mining 12 years later. And that's because there have been lots of lawsuits filed under the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, which serves a really important role at allowing individuals and groups to sue to prevent mining. But I think that the groups that are suing to prevent mining, they've lost sight of the ultimate prize, which is for the energy transition to happen quickly, not irresponsibly, but to happen quickly. And by preventing that mining, they're really preventing the energy transition from happening. There's a deposit in Minnesota that is currently, it has received all of the permits to mine nickel and copper, but it has been a Herculean effort to get not local stakeholders, because the local stakeholders there, they view it as a good source of jobs for at least several decades, but it's been a Herculean effort to convince environmental groups that the mining permits should be granted so they can start mining copper and nickel, both of which are fundamental to manufacturing batteries, whether it's in an electric vehicle or it's grid-scale storage. And I had a couple of slides. Is this an okay time to show them?
Sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah.
So one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is trying to help people understand how much of each of the metals we need. We hear all the time in the news about energy critical minerals. The United States Geological Survey, the Department of Energy, they both classify every year all the elements in the periodic table according to what, their criticality. And criticality is defined, among other ways, by assessing the risk of the source of those metals. So cobalt is predominantly coming from the DRC. The DRC is a risky place to mine. Risk also translate into higher discount rates to get the capital to build the mining infrastructure. And we commonly read reports from the IEA, the IEF, DOE on we need X times more of something. So we just submitted this actually to Nature Communications last week. And I just want to walk through one example that's only here for copper. And if you email me, I will send you this as well as the spreadsheet that has all of the math behind how this graph was constructed. But what you're looking at is on the y-axis is millions of tons of copper. The x-axis is time. So what my collaborator did, and what my collaborator and I did, is we looked at historic mine production of copper from 1900 to 2018. And all of those data are publicly available because companies and governments make those data available. So we know how many tons of copper were mined every single year. And then we simply mathematically fit an equation that reproduces the mine production of copper over those 118 years. And then we project out the line here that's labeled baseline. We project out under business as usual conditions this is how much copper society should expect mining companies to produce. The problem is, when you actually look at all of the mining companies globally on 6 continents who mine copper, these two sort of bell curves here labeled possible and probable, that is the actual amount of copper that all existing mining companies tell us they will produce over the next 6 years. And what that reflects is that mining companies globally, the amount of copper they're producing year over year is declining. And they're not able to get the social license to operate to find and build new mines. So they're decreasing the amount of effort that they spend to find new resources, and they're looking at mines essentially sunsetting without being replaced. We also calculated these lines for electric vehicles plus grid upgrades, and then there should be a line here that says net zero by 2050. The takeaway is that each of these lines, that is the amount of copper we need to transition our entire vehicle fleet to battery electric vehicles, to provide all of that new electricity from a combination of wind and solar, and to build out 28 days of grid-scale lithium-ion battery storage. So what we have is, this is how much demand we would have if we see the energy transition through. This is how much copper we're actually going to be able to access. This is a plot that shows you in blue for every year from 1990. This is the number of what we consider to be world-class copper ore deposits discovered by geologists somewhere on 6 continents, excluding Antarctica. The green is how much money, on the right y-axis, how much money mining companies are spending to find those new deposits. And the takeaway is, mining companies in the last decade have spent on average 5 times more money than they did in the 1980s and 1990s to find the same amount of metal. And what this speaks to is that mining companies increasingly are finding it harder and harder and harder to locate volumes of earth that actually contain high enough concentrations of copper and lithium and cobalt that they can justify seeking capital to build a mining operation. So what we have is this huge supply gap that is not made up. It's a real supply gap because we know what the IRA calls for. You can pretty easily calculate how much copper and other metals are required to satisfy the climate provisions of the IRA. We know how much copper mining companies are going to produce, and this is the gap. So in 2022, mining companies produced about 22 million tons of copper. By 2060, mining companies need to be producing at least double and possibly triple that amount of copper. And that can only happen if mining companies get the social license to operate. So what we need is strong permit reform to happen in Washington, D.C.
Right. So you made a strong case for this, but as we look at not just copper, other minerals, this impending supply-demand gap that's going to come across. And so one is permitting reform, definitely, but then at the same time, the incentives that insist on onshoring supply chains, that further creates a gap in some ways, right? That is, we can't just simply be relying on what's available in the United States, even if we, with a magic wand, somehow made permitting reform easy. So can we speak to a little bit of that? And I don't know what conversations you're having when you said you met with John Podesta and, globally, if you look at, how should we think about this?
Sure, and Schneider Electric uses 0.8% of the global copper. So what Adam is talking about is incredibly important to the future of our business, and that's today, right? That's to Adam's point, is as you start going up this track and there's more EV charging infrastructure built out, more panels are switched out of people's homes because they were never built with the assumption that you'd be charging an electric vehicle on this. And so the conversations we've been having in DC, and I think what's most important for the 406 students here today, is when you head out tomorrow or whenever, is just the realization that what you're experiencing this weekend can't end, because you have to be the voice to continue to push forward, more specifically generations such as us up here that haven't gotten the progress we need. And to Adam's point, we all need to benefit from the success of what this is going to deliver, And we need to get away from the "but not in my backyard." And so I think what's going to be critical is we, change human behavior. It doesn't happen instantaneously, and it doesn't happen as fast in a place like Michigan, where thankfully we haven't felt the effects as much as the coasts, the southern part of the U.S., other parts of the world, but it's coming. And so please, as you do leave here, don't end it with tomorrow, but continue the voice. It's something we continue to do in Washington ourselves, with other competitors that we get together, and continue to advise the president and his various offices that we do need to have some policy changes so that we can get this to the speed with which he had originally set out.
Brian, you have a perspective on this as, more on when you buy stuff, and people are asking the questions that you mentioned about where it's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple things. One, just like in general, the policy question, right? So,
Yeah.
We have, the IRA comes out. It has a lot of great provisions in it, but there's not enough in there that really helps you actually get things built. There's things that bring down your capital costs, assuming you can get them built. But all the things that you have to go through from a permitting perspective, from a community involvement perspective, from getting the regional transmission organizations on board, getting the independent system operators on board, there is a huge lag in time between like when you actually start a project to when you get a project built, right? So that's kind of one thing. This is definitely misaligned with customer expectations, right? The customers don't realize, oh, it's going to take me that many years. I just set this goal. I'm going to be, whatever percent, decarbonized in the next 5 years. That's really hard to do in the short term because all the projects that are being built right now that'll be ready in 5 years, they're getting off-taken today. They already have customers. All of the work that's being done is making it so all of the policy that's going on right now is making it so the demand is getting more and more intense. There's not enough to make it easy for the supply to keep up. Even I can speak specifically, from the generation side, being able to build these projects out quickly enough, but also from being able to get all the components. We can't get them fast enough. It used to be that if you needed some major pieces of equipment, your like long lead time items were like 18 months. Now it can be 3 years. So it's just really, really making those time frames longer and longer and longer. So policies that would help make all of that happen faster, make the permitting happen faster, making it so the transmission studies happen faster, make it so that the organizations that are building the manufacturing facilities for new solar modules and everything else can do that faster. All of that is what's necessary.
Can I just add something
Sure.
to that? So just a couple of points. One, the graph up here, importantly, doesn't show you how much copper and other metals are going to be necessary for example, increasing the availability of air conditioning. The number one cause of deaths globally now, outside of heart disease and cancer, is heat. And if we look at countries such as India with 1.5 billion people, China with 1.5 billion people, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Africa in total is supposed to double its population to 2 billion over the next 50 years. All of those places require more energy infrastructure, more electricity. And so if you imagine a world where instead of only developed countries having electricity for air conditioning, the whole world has electricity for air conditioning, then the copper demand just goes up even faster. For the time frames, you're talking about the time frame from when you want to put a shovel into the ground to build a grid-scale renewable energy infrastructure. From the mining perspective on the upstream supply chain, from the day that a geologist says, I know that this volume of earth has enough copper that we can actually mine it and at least break even and hope to make a profit, the average length of time globally is 16 years. 16. So it's 2024. That would mean the copper for a mine that is ideated this year, the copper would be available in 2040. Then Kevin's company would buy it to manufacture something with it, to ship it to Brian so he could build. And so when you sum all of these time frames, we're looking at 20, 30, 40 years into the future. Third point, and then I'll let you go to other questions. The United States is 4% of the world's population, and we consume 17% of the world's energy. 4% of the population and 17% of the world's energy. And I look at that as if we can transition here, everything that we ideate and develop and make our reality, we can also build that around the world. So I spent 2 weeks in August traveling around the copper belt in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and every person that I met wants this. Every person that I met wants clean water. Clean water requires copper. Every person wants wastewater that can be treated. That requires copper. Everyone wants a panel box in their house made by Square D. That requires copper. And so it's not just about the energy transition, but it's about providing new access to energy for approximately 4 billion people around the world who don't have access the way that we do.
An excellent point, Adam. Just want to kind of add to that. Which also means then that while we focus on onshoring, the last point that you made, because there are reserves across this continent, could we not use that to tap into these other resources and combine the mining, extraction, processing with also development? And if that needs to happen, and you earlier raised about if we attach an E and S to the mining sector, yes, everything we do here has to be clean, but it's not. How do we kind of navigate this stuff? So this idea that has been floating around, I'm sure you've heard, friend-shoring, near-shoring, allied shoring, and all these different prefixes come into shoring. What's happening there, and how should we think about this?
I think that really resonates with me. If we think about how human development happens and capacity building happens, it can't happen only with charitable contributions. There has to be capital, there has to be a revenue stream. So my trip to the DRC was focused on understanding artisanal mining, which is in the news all the time. And the artisanal mining that's being done in the DRC for lots of metals, copper, cobalt, tin, gold, etc. It's the same artisanal mining that my Irish ancestors, when they immigrated to the United States, they did that type of artisanal mining circa 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. And when we met with artisanal miners, they're scared about shutting down artisanal mining because there's no other option. There's no unemployment insurance, there's no Social Security, there's no safety net. So what we also really need to think about doing, to your point, is working with countries such as the DRC to truly partner with them so that capacity building happens through resource extraction and exporting those resources to countries that have the capital that want to transition our already existing infrastructure.
In that, so let's pivot from policy to the role of businesses. What could businesses do in this whole process of transition?
Stop hiding behind plausible deniability.
Okay. Schneider's perspective.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, Schneider Electric is considered via the Corporate Knights in Canada as one of the world's most sustainable companies. In 2021, we were named the world's most sustainable company. And if you were here for the talks yesterday, yes, executives, myself included at Schneider, 20% of our annual bonus is driven off of our hitting or not hitting our 11 sustainable development goals. We've taken the 17, we've applied the 11 that are most appropriate to us, and we are tracking those. You'll see them next Thursday when we announce quarterly earnings, the year earnings, and we'll highlight where we are on this path forward. So we are very much in agreement with this. Starts from the very top, comes all the way down. We were one of the first companies in 2005 when our then CEO, now Chairman, Jean-Pascal Turcois, started talking about this sustainability, and he was scoffed at. He was asked, why the hell are you spending any time talking about this? And he says, because it's important. It's important for our customers, it's important for our employees, and it's what drives us forward. The point about globalization, we are a very global company. We do business in 150 countries. Our chairman, actually, Jean-Pascal, sits in Hong Kong at the moment, and he's actually on President Xi Jinping's circle of 10 global CEOs, which puts us a bit at odds when I'm in Washington, D.C., talking to U.S. legislators. And you may have seen last January of 2023, the U.S. Formed a bipartisan group called the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. And so the US government both wants and needs what Adam's talking about to be able to deliver the solutions for this country. At the same time, they want to be very careful with whom we are partnering to do that. And so it is raising some additional hurdles as we try to walk through. Two companies, not US, one Swiss, one US, were called out by this committee in the last couple of weeks. One is ABB, a competitor of ours. The other is Ford Motor Company, because of their utilization and partnerships with companies in China. And so it is a very fine balance that we are walking at the moment to try to access these solutions that we need to help decarbonize and electrify this country, and doing it in a very sustainable way, working with the right partners around the world.
So maybe Brian, to see when you do this installation, do you ask these questions about how far do you go back in the supply chain and ask these questions of suppliers who supply materials to you?
Yeah, frankly, it depends on what a specific customer wants, right? So, we have customers who want to know, I want to see traceability all the way back to whatever. Very rarely to say, I want to see where the copper came from, but they want traceability back into certain areas. And so we work hard to provide that for them because it's what the customer wants. But we aren't trying to be so far ahead of the customer on this, right? And so, look, frankly, some customers are more advanced in their sustainability journeys and love to work with them, love those that want to see every inch of traceability and want to make sure everything's really, really spot on. Then there's other customers who are, whether it's because they're more cost sensitive or whether it's because they're just very new to this and just trying to, dip their toes in. It's good for everyone to start moving in the right direction, even if it's not perfect from day one. So we'll work with them too on it. And throughout the entire relationship with the customer, we'll continue to help educate and help them understand, why is it important to have traceability? Why is it important to understand where different pieces came from, right? There's a lot with the forced labor issues with the Uyghurs in China. And it was very eye-opening to a lot of customers who were like, in retrospect, where did my equipment come from? And we were fortunate; we hadn't bought anything from there. But because of things like that, and because we want to be ahead of on the right side of history on things, we try to be ahead on all these things, and we try to explain it to customers. But a lot of business school students in here, you guys will know, if you are making your product so much better than what your customers actually want, they rarely will pay for it, and it's usually like not actually better than what they want. So you've got to find the right customer for the right product, and traceability and the depth of all these different pieces fit into that.
Thank you. I think, just want to touch upon a couple of other things before we open up the floor for questions. Adam, you talked a lot about the difficulty. I think that, your chart is gone, but, in terms of larger and larger investments going into mines, same or smaller amounts, so which is, the difficulty of that, which means the role of technology, R&D, et cetera, in improving that exploration process of finding, and then also if we go into, even from a sustainability lens, from a technology, R&D perspective, what needs to happen, that's one aspect. And the other one really is, what do we see as the roles of other ecosystem members, not just the businesses who actually consume the stuff, and the government policy do we see? So two-part question to you start, and then we can go from others. What kind of R&D needs to happen to?
Yeah, so I think in the world of mining, there's a lot of R&D that is happening in real time to automate and make safer mining operations. So, for example, there is a company called Hexagon, and one of their divisions, Hexagon Mining. They are really moving forward with autonomous vehicles in both open pit, above ground mines, and also underground mines. And the autonomous vehicles allow the mines to be more efficient, and they allow them to be more productive because they work 24/7, 365. They never take a sick day. So that R&D is happening. There's a lot of R&D that's happening to improve the efficiency of separating metals from different types of rock, and I'll give a couple of examples. So in the world of solar panels, cadmium telluride solar panels are just crushing it. You know, they've got efficiencies now of 22, 23, 24% for commercial scale solar panels. Cadmium is not mined at any mine around the world as the primary commodity, and the same with tellurium. Cadmium is a byproduct or a co-product of zinc mining, and tellurium is a co-product of copper mining. So if a mining company wants to produce tellurium, they have to find enough rock with enough copper to actually build the mine, and copper covers all of the cost, and then they can co-produce tellurium. The same for zinc. But in order to build new mines, you have to discover new ore deposits. And one of the reasons, as was shown here, where the green line indicates a lot more money being spent for a lot fewer deposits that are being found, is mining companies are really stuck in the 20th century. So for a long time, mining companies, finding deposits was easy. You know, if you read the Old Testament, there are what we call the 7 metals of antiquity. And we didn't leave the Stone Age to go to the Copper Age because we ran out of stones. But we left the Copper Age to go to the Bronze Age because we figured out how to make alloys. Mining companies are rooted in old technology. And one of the things that I've been doing off campus is working with some collaborators to develop new technologies that allow us to find hidden ore deposits at hundreds to thousands of feet beneath the surface that could be mined in the near future.
Any thoughts on R&D, entrepreneurship, other investment space and all that?
I mean, I would just say that, like, you know, in areas where the industry is already quite mature, like solar, like I wouldn't start there. I would start at like the next sets of technologies, right? Like I would be, you know, if I was trying to start something new in the US right now, I wouldn't be like, I want to like build out my solar module company. I would be like, how do I get involved in carbon capture? Or how do I do something about the transmission system? So I would put my innovation into those spaces. I mean, I assume we're going to need a lot of materials to get the transmission systems in order to support all of the clean energy, right? So, you know, an ability to get more efficient, effective transmission wires would be like wildly helpful, considering how short we are on materials and how much more transmission we need to actually make all of this work in the future. So I would be more focused in the innovation space in those areas.
Yeah, at Schneider, obviously you don't stay alive 188 years without making pivots as the world changes. About 5 years ago, we launched our Innovation at the Edge program. From there, we launched Schneider Ventures. We're about $700 million of committed capital into, I think, 50 or so startups around the world. We also launched a couple of joint ventures, one called Alpha Structure with the Carlyle Group, where we're delivering energy as a service solutions across the U.S. A big project we've announced is the redevelopment of JFK Terminal 1. Once complete, it will be the most sustainable airport in the U.S., top 3 in the world. Everything on the tarmac will be electrified. We've electrified the Port of L.A., we're electrifying other ports. Montgomery County, Maryland, we're in the process of electrifying their entire municipal bus fleet. At the same time, we'll be creating green hydrogen on site because 14 other routes, electric isn't going to take them that distance. And so we continue to stay very much on this leading edge. And something we launched last year at the CES, Consumer Electronics Show, was our prosumer offering, because consumers are not just consuming energy, they're also producing it. And we have a full solution working with KB Homes in the Department of Energy in a 250-home area in San Diego. In a typical burn area, a brownout area. And so the community is being developed so they can shut off from the grid. And there'll be microgrids on site to continue their power going forward. In the midst of it, we're hoping to have a ribbon cutting with the DOE Secretary Granholm, in about 3 months.
Great. So we've heard, you know, entrepreneurship, et cetera, all across the value chain, from mining to other areas. One last point that I don't, you know, I just want us to hit on is we can extract a lot of stuff, we can use a lot of stuff, but what is the recycling infrastructure that needs to happen? Because we just can't keep going back to the ground and try to extract this stuff. There are limits to that, right?
So recycling will continue to get better. Currently, globally, about 35% of the copper that we mine and embed in products we recycle. So we also, in the paper that I'm happy to share with anyone who wants it, we also modeled improving recycling from 2022 to 2050, assuming annual improvements in recycling that we have seen over the last several decades. Eventually, if I imagine solar arrays that are built 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we'll be able to recycle everything that's in a solar array. We're already able to recycle lithium-ion batteries in toto. We refer to those as black mass, but we don't have lots of facilities. Right now, there are 2 facilities being built in the United States, but 10, 15, 20 years from now, that's going to become the norm. And there's also downcycling. So for example, if you buy a Tesla and you charge that Tesla and you drive 100,000 miles, as soon as your batteries no longer achieve a charge above about 79 or 80%, you can transition those batteries for home energy storage. So we're going to see both a combination of true recycling. Imagine taking batteries and putting them in a vat of acid and you get all the metals out that went in. And then also downcycling, where we can use those lithium-ion batteries for multiple purposes over their lifetime.
What are you guys doing? I mean, how are you engaging on recycling conversations?
Yeah, so a couple pieces there. So one, on the battery side, we actually are experimenting with the downcycling, right, from EV batteries. It's not always like the right choice for like a grid scale battery, but it's an interesting thing that we're trying out and seeing how it works. And then the second thing I would hit on is any project that we build, we have to have a plan for how we're going to remediate at the end. So there's always an environmental remediation plan that usually involves some amount of reuse or recycling of the materials.
Yeah, we have pretty aggressive carbon neutrality commitments. 2025 will be carbon neutral with offsets. 2030, our entire value chain carbon neutral with offsets. 2040, our supply chain completely net zero, and by 2050, us and our supply chain completely net zero. We launched a project a year ago called the Zero Carbon Project, where we're taking our top 1,000 suppliers, and between 2021 and 2025, so 12 months from now, we are committed to having their GHG emissions reduced by 50%. And we're tracking this. As of Q3, we were at 23.8%. We'll announce end of years next week. And what we found is that, and a lot of our suppliers are mom and pops, globally and in the US, even to the point where one of them commented, when we talked about greenhouse gas emissions, they laughed and said, greenhouse gas emissions, we don't make greenhouses. So that's from whom you're dealing with. And so what we found is you get them together and start talking to them. We got them to a visibility into 19%. 3 months later, they came back with visibility to 50%. So we're forming a community of companies, and we're working with the National Association of Manufacturing on the same point. President Biden has a huge focus on small and medium manufacturers in this country that must decarbonize for him to hit his goals. And we at Schneider are putting together solutions and tools to assist in the process.
Right.
Just one quick comment. For those in the audience that want to go into the world of capital and financing, the responsible way to do this is to work with mining companies and work with consumers such as Schneider. 0.8% of the world's copper is phenomenal. So that every new mining operation already has in place an offtake agreement. Yeah. And that's what Talon Metals in Minnesota has. They have an offtake agreement for the copper and nickel from Tesla. And that also ensures that there are more eyes on the mining project to make sure it's done responsibly.
As you can see, there's so much to discuss, but I think we want to hear from the audience questions. So, Hartmann, what do you have?
Yeah, we have quite a few interesting questions, and these are the questions submitted by the audience on the app. So one of the biggest questions that I'm seeing here is that in the last 20 years, large portions of our manufacturing industries have gone overseas. And basically, we have lost the skills and knowledge with it as well, right? What are the private companies doing to educate the next generation of the workforce at all levels of the corporation?
Yeah, so it is an absolute issue. It's the issue we brought up as we try to reshore manufacturing back to the U.S. is we can't find the skilled workers in the places, and we're working with the administration on that. And one of the issues, my belief is, we in the U.S. have focused too much on every 17 and 18-year-old must go get a 4-year degree. And a lot of them actually waste a lot of money and basically never should have done that, and the trades have lost their voice. And so what we need to do is transfer into a conversation that when you're 17 and 18, yes, going to get a 4-year degree is great, but also you can have an incredible, well-funded career by going into trade, plumbing, manufacturing, electricians, which we need a lot of. And so what we're doing is working with a number of organizations. The National Association of Manufacturing has a group called Creators Wanted that we're involved with, trying to just educate youth that there's other alternatives. Also working with the National Electrical Contractors Association, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, and trade schools, specifically around where we have our plants. So there's an ongoing conversation, but the problem is they're very disparate. There's not an overwhelming, overarching theme across the administration, and it's something we've continued to push the president to do more of, but it's still a gap.
I might just add, I mean, I think like a lot of manufacturing went overseas in part because labor cost was cheaper there and labor cost was more expensive here. You know, as we add more automation to the factories here, it doesn't solve the jobs issue part of this, but it solves the onshore manufacturing part of it. And it can, you know, then you actually can end up in a situation where you're not really competing on labor rates anymore, but you can compete on other things. And it might even be energy costs, or it might be whatever else, you know, local that's around there that makes the supply chain more efficient.
The next question that we have is, how do we balance the positive effects of onshoring, that is job creation, national security, with the negatives, that is higher costs, and how higher costs hinder efforts to scale renewable energy generation with urgency?
I guess I would say, like, why has it got to be higher cost? let me just start there. You know, and like it all depends, you know, on what you think's reasonable. Like, if it's higher cost to do it in the U.S. because people are being paid a living wage, and elsewhere they're not being paid very well, I mean, like, maybe we should be charging a tariff that makes sure that people from other countries are being paid more to do the same work. So I don't know that it has to be higher cost. That said, in the energy space, I guess what I would say is, you know, and this is not the company line, but like, energy costs people less than a cup of coffee a day. So if it had to cost a little bit more so that it was clean and safe and reliable and created jobs, I mean, it's a conversation worth having.
Yeah.
Trade coffee.
Their trade coffee. The Starbucks right in here, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Any thoughts from you guys on that? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Is you think about the value proposition into the question, yes, by moving it to the U.S., you probably have greater certainty that you're going to get the product on time. To what was brought up, you know, if you continue to do things offshore, you'll get the product, but are you willing to wait a year for it? So how much are we willing to value and put a cost or a price on the fact that I can have more certainty in getting it here? So once again, with all of you, as you graduate over the coming years, how do you assist in driving the conversation from one that historically was, we only wanted low cost, don't tell me about anything else, it just confuses me, to how do you talk about more that this product was manufactured appropriately, paid a living wage, greater, more net zero supply chains to get it to you. We also are doing work with actually Walmart on their gigaton project as they look to decarbonize their entire supply chain. So it's occurring, but the conversation needs to change.
I think similar to, I mean, just want to add to that, if you think about what EU is doing, just the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So the CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism, is basically saying you can outshore what you want, but there's going to be a carbon tax on that. You have to give me the carbon footprint of where it is produced, and there's going to be tax on that. So just that's kind of a non-tariff kind of barrier you're creating, and maybe similar things need to happen. Yes, you could have a mine somewhere else, but as you pointed out, Adam, before that, what are the labor issues, environmental issues, and if we kind of tag those things along and accordingly adjust this in some ways.
Yeah, we were actually one of the founding partners of an entity called the Climate Leadership Council in Washington, D.C., probably 7 years ago, very much Republican-led, and it was really pushing on the need for this carbon tax, carbon fee, carbon, you call it whatever, but it is absolutely impossible to get this through it was impossible to get it through the legislature 8 years ago. It's much more impossible to get it through today.
And that depends on who's in the administration too, right? So, yeah.
And I would just add, we also need to balance labor costs and the cost of mining within the United States and within the EU with the environmental damage that is being done by mining in select areas around the world. So, for example, nickel, which is fundamental to cathodes in batteries in every electric vehicle and grid-scale battery storage, sure, there's a lot of R&D being done to try and figure out how can you replace nickel? And you can find some replacements in some applications, but nickel is always going to be fundamental to lithium-ion batteries. The three leading producers of nickel in the world are Indonesia, the Philippines, and New Caledonia, where nickel mining is effectively strip mining. So if you can picture strip mining of coal in West Virginia, that's the type of mining that's being done. And so the overall environmental costs are much higher. Labor is cheaper, but it's in my opinion, that is a net negative.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. That was actually the next question. How can we strike a balance?
Clairvoyant.
How can we strike a balance in obtaining the minerals that will power the energy transition without permanently harming the environment? So Brian and Kevin, if you have any other comments on that.
Nothing to add.
I think it takes a change in mindset. You know, everybody has this image of mining as dirty and evil and bad, and that has stimulated now the acronym BANANA. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. But that doesn't make the energy transition happen. And I have conversations with people that on most days I think are incredibly smart, and they will listen to all of the reasons that they should support responsible mining, and they still will say no. And if you say no, then in essence, if you are in favor of the energy transition and you say no to mining, you're saying yes to fossil fuels. That's the default. And fossil fuel companies are more than happy for the environmental groups to continue to oppose mining, because that allows them to continue dominating the energy landscape.
The other tag on that is, it's not, one is if you're saying no to mining, then you're saying yes to fossil fuel, or you're comfortable saying yes to mining in these other countries. That raises a whole other issues about environmental justice issues, that we want to here drive our Teslas, breathe clean air. We don't give a damn about what's going to happen in other countries, but I still want those minerals. I think that's if you look at it from a justice lens, it's just, I don't know, my blood boils.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we ran those numbers, and, you know, following up on that comment, what is likely to happen in the next 10 to 20 years under a business as usual model, we're already going to blow past 1.5 degrees C relative to pre-industrial revolution. Like, we're almost there. We're almost certainly going to blow past 2 degrees of warming relative to pre-industrial. But 3 degrees, we really want to avoid that, because we understand what 3 degrees of warming will do to the world's ocean levels. We really need to think about the ideal marriage between our demand and capacity building. Because under business as usual conditions, we are going to take the copper because we can afford where the copper is embedded. And that is going to result in the gap, the income gap between the, quote, more advanced countries and less advanced countries. That income gap is just going to increase, because all of the copper and cobalt being mined artisanally in the DRC, it's not going to stay there. It's not going to get embedded into products that improve the quality of life. It's all going to come here or to the EU. And so, in essence, by continuing to do what we're currently doing, we're already choosing the end point, which is less developed countries remain less developed.
And when they run out of materials and we develop a recycling infrastructure, all the materials are here.
Yeah.
That's a lot to chew over lunch.
Very good.
With that,
It's gonna be
we'll close.
crunchy.
Yeah. With that, we'll close this panel. I would like to really thank the panelists for being here. Just for reference, for all of the attendees, we have coffee chats going on. We'll have lunch and learn sessions in Tauber and Blau colloquiums. You can find Tauber right beside Starbucks. Take the elevator right on the left of Starbucks. For Blau colloquium, just go across the double doors and you can take the elevators up. And thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
So I round that up. 1% of the
Point
global
eight.
copper?
0.8%.
That's one to me.
so much.
That's one.
Ooh, I'm an engineer. It's not
Ah,
the same.
It needs to go to one. That's amazing.
It may, I know.
That's
And the silver is or aluminum is on a similar type thing.
I bet. I was going to ask you, silver, aluminum.